Tenant advocates in Nevada are proposing good cause eviction protections and rent control for elderly tenants. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of Nevada. Now, obviously, I don't cover too many articles out of Nevada because it's not known to be a very anti-landlord place, okay? But there are a lot of progressive people there who are trying to change that, trying to make things worse for property owners and landlords by passing all these ridiculous rules that have already been passed in California. What I personally think it is there's so many people from California moving into Nevada, and they're bringing their ridiculous politics, their ridiculous bureaucracy, and their ridiculous rules and regulations with them because, in their minds, they're like, hey, we should make this place more like California. But then they don't realize the reason they left was because California probably was too expensive for them to live. So, that should tell them right there, hey, maybe what we were doing in California just doesn't work. But they don't seem to understand that point. But anyway, advocates suggested throwing rent stabilization out there for the elderly, right? So you know what that is, rent control, okay? They like to change the name of it. Oh, it's rent stabilization. We're just going to stabilize the rent. No, you're trying to control the rent. Okay, you're not fooling anybody by trying to change the name of the term. It's rent control, and whether it's for the elderly or for everyone, right? Well, you know what? They'll start with the elderly. They'll then try to ease it into being over everyone. Oh, it worked fine for the elderly. Well, you know what? The elderly are no more deserving of rent control. There's no reason for artificial price controls to be put in the marketplace for the elderly or not. Now, if they want to propose, raising their taxes in the state of Nevada so that they can provide housing assistance vouchers to the elderly so that they can pay for their housing, that's fine. That's up to them, right? What I don't want to see, though, is landlords and business owners being forced to, lose money renting to these tenants because you know what's going to happen, right? Landlords are going to choose not to rent to the elderly. They're not going to say they're not doing it for that reason, but when they find out that they're stuck under rent control policies, they're just going to say, hey, we're just going to rent to the younger people instead. Now they say, oh, well, age discrimination is illegal. Well, they're not going to tell them that's why. You think landlords are dumb? No, they'll come up with some other reason, or they might not give a reason at all. And they're just going to choose a different tenant who is younger and doesn't get these protections from rent control. And is that what they want? To make it harder for the elderly to find housing? I think that's a horrible idea. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. What do you think of a rent control policy for the elderly? Okay? Do you think this is a good idea or a bad idea? Do you think this is going to work out the way they think it will? Or do you think it is, just going to end up being a load of garbage? Okay? I already told you what I think, okay? More regulations, more rules on landlords, and the harder they make it for us to do our business, that makes the price of housing go up. It makes it harder for the people who really need the housing to find the affordable housing they want. Okay? Anyway, let's get into this article. It's coming from NevadaCurrent.com, and it says, advocates float rent stabilization for seniors, compensation for no-cause evictions. Yeah, let's get into it. Gathering from her experience of living in New York, a senior advocate proposes rent stabilization as a possible method for controlling sudden rent increase in Nevada, specifically for older members of the community. That was among several policy concepts being proposed and discussed in a policy forums held in Reno and Las Vegas this summer by the Nevada Housing Coalition, according to forum participants. The coalition is a statewide nonprofit that promotes affordable housing for Nevadans through advocacy, education, and collaboration. As an ex-New Yorker, Marcy Kupfersmith, who is also part of the policy committee of the Nevada Housing Coalition, suggested rent stabilization for Nevada seniors, a concept that has been prevalent in New York since 1969. Yeah, well, look how expensive and how hard it is to find affordable housing in New York, okay? Look at all the regulations. Tell me, is it actually easier for the senior citizens to find affordable housing in New York or in Nevada? I mean, I don't even have to look at the prices and I already know what it is, okay? Nevada stomps all over New York when it comes to affordable housing, okay, for seniors especially. And you want to bring this garbage from, New York and bring it into Nevada, this rent control? No, it's a horrible idea. It is so bad, and yet you moved to Nevada probably because you couldn't afford to live there. Okay, and now you're trying to bring that ridiculous stuff with you? Get out of here with that, okay? Maybe you should go back to New York if you like it so much. I mean, come on. As explained to The Current by Kupfersmith, senior tenants in Nevada would have a multi-year lease effectively for 2 or 3 years, which would operate with a built-in increase. Being aware of the increases would give the seniors an opportunity to budget themselves, Kupfersmith said. The tenant would also have enough time to move out of the apartment if the rent would not seem affordable to them in the long run. So they want you to be forced to give a tenant, multi-year lease even if you don't want to do it? No, okay? Remember, this is your property. You don't have to give, if you want to give the tenant a 6-month lease or a month-to-month lease, then that should be your right as the property owner. You shouldn't be forced by the state government to, I got to give them a multi-year lease and I can only raise the rent as much as, the government allows me to raise it over each year. No, that's stupid, okay? It's stupid and I hate it. I hate all rent control, and that's all this is. A senior herself, Kupfersmith said, in Nevada, every 10 months, seniors get nervous about what their situation is going to be. She expressed concern that it becomes even more challenging for a senior to worry about additional costs like a security deposit and cost of relocation to that of the first month rent every time the person moves. Rent stabilization can be especially beneficial for retired seniors with middle but fixed incomes who don't qualify for rental assistance programs, she said. Yeah, well, she's only looking out for her own good. And that's the way most of these tenant advocates work, okay? They only care about their own personal situation, and they don't think overall about, hey, what about future tenants? How is this going to affect them? Hey, what about the landlords? How is this going to affect them? How is this going to affect future development in the area where we live? She don't care. Only thing she cares about is, my rent didn't go up. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about it, okay? And yes, prices are going to increase. That happens in every sector all throughout the entire world, okay? You cannot control the price increases. It is unfortunate if you can no longer afford to live somewhere because the rent rose. I mean, it is. I mean, I'm not saying that, hey, I want people being kicked out on the street, but what I am saying is that the market is what dictates the price of these rentals, not the landlord themselves, okay? The landlord is reacting to what the market is doing. So when the landlord gets a new higher property tax bill, when the landlord has a higher utility bill, when the landlord's 5-year balloon on their mortgage expires and then they're forced to refinance into a new mortgage with a higher interest rate, well, guess what? That means all of their expenses have gone up and they're going to charge their tenants higher rent so that they can pay for those new higher expenses. That is very much the way the economy works. Plus, a landlord is absolutely 100% entitled to a profit for operating their business. 100% they are entitled to a profit. Do not listen to the people who say otherwise, because they are the ones who I call socialists. Okay, they believe that no, landlords are not entitled to a profit, or maybe the government should dictate what that profit is. No, that is not the way the markets should work. So let's see what else they say here, right? And it's not all about rent control when it comes to this whole, all the suggestions that they're making. So paying displaced tenants. Another proposal that intrigues coalition members has said is a displacement or relocation policy modeled after an ordinance in Portland, Oregon. If a tenant is displaced for no fault of their own, the landlord must compensate the tenant for their moving costs. Under the Portland program, such mandatory relocation assistance payments range from $2,900 for tenants in a studio apartment to $4,500 for those being displaced from a property with 3 or more bedrooms. So yeah, once again, they're trying to bring in stupid policies from another one of these far left-leaning progressive places where housing is ungodly expensive, and there's little development, little investment in terms of what landlords are building that is affordable for people. Yeah, don't ever take your, try to make policy advice and take it from places like, in terms of housing, trying to make housing more affordable. Don't take your policy advice from places like LA, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, New York City. I mean, it's ridiculous, okay? Why would you take your policy advice from these places where the housing is the most expensive in the entire country? That is idiotic. Instead, you should be looking at places where housing is cheap, and those are the things that you should be doing in order to keep housing cheap where you're at. Okay, so if you look off to places like Missouri, okay, I mean, you could still get yourself a nice 1-bedroom rental in Missouri for $700 a month. Okay, so I mean, obviously housing is a lot cheaper there than it is in New York City. So what's Missouri doing? Well, they don't have all those stupid regulations. Okay, they don't have rent control. They don't have good cause eviction. They don't have any of that. And the government there, the politicians there, are actually encouraging developers. They're encouraging landlords to reinvest in neighborhoods and try to make things better. So that's why the housing is so much less expensive, and those are the policies that they should be trying to push in Nevada.